What's up guys, so today we're going to be talking about Flux, if it wasn't obvious already. I'm going to be comparing all of these types of Flux and we're going to be rating them on a scale from 0 to 25 points. Flux has always been my weak spot when it comes to soldering tools. As you guys have probably seen with my other videos, I really like tools and finding what works for me, but I haven't really gotten the chance to do that with Flux yet. So this is an attempt to remedy that. I've only ever used this garbage right here, which is a Amtech NC559 clone. And God knows why I dealt with using this stuff for so long. It's sort of the lowest of the low when it comes to fluxes. So I was done using this, and as some of you guys may have seen, I branched out and started trying out this nanoflux paste from Mechanic. So I made a community post asking what flux you guys like, and I got these fluxes right here, which we'll go through in a moment. A couple things I want to point out. Number one, we do not have genuine Amtech. This is on purpose actually, because I want to make a separate video dedicated to Amtech flux, so keep an eye out for that. I figured because it's sort of an industry standard, it kind of deserves its own video. Outside of that, there are a lot of fluxes to choose from. I'm going to keep a list and we're going to take the top 1 or 2 from this video, pull them into the next video along with a bunch of other fluxes that you guys recommend, and we can do the same tests that I did here. As with any other tool video, this is going to be my opinion, so my point scale is going to cater towards the things I care about when I'm working with flux. Other people are going to care more about things that I care less about, and just because I give one of these a good personal rating does not mean it is objectively better. We're going to be taking a look at 7 different things with all of these fluxes to give them a rating of 0 through 25. We're going to be taking a look at these in order of cheapest to most expensive. So the first one we're going to take a look at here is the Kingbo RMA 218. This is from Tokyo, Japan, and it comes in at around $3.28. So this thing is real cheap. It is a summer sale right now on AliExpress, but honestly, AliExpress has sales like this year round, so it's not like this is out of the ordinary for pricing. So Kingbo gets 1 point for price. I wasn't able to find a data sheet. All I was able to find was this. The point for this is easy to find data sheet. I'm not gonna reach out to the company for one. I want it to be easily available and a Google search. So this unofficial data sheet from a completely unrelated company is all I could find, with absolutely no actual MSDS or anything. So this does not count. So no point for the data sheet for the Kingbo, but up to you whether or not you care about that kind of thing. Personally for me, it's just sort of a nice to have, which is why I'm only assigning 1 point to it. So let's take a look at the consistency of this stuff as well. And I thought, what better way to test these fluxes than on the beautiful white PCBs that we got from today's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay offers high quality PCB fabrication and CNC and 3D printing services. And they also currently have their 11-year anniversary promotion running. They're offering exclusive coupons. And they also have special offers on things like their PCB assembly services. So if you're thinking about getting some PCBs created or assembled, now is the perfect time. You can just go to their website and go to PCB Instant Quote and then click upload Gerber files and then upload your zip. And then you've got a preview of the PCBs right here, and you can change options like the color of the solder mask and silk screen. You can even check this box to get a SMD stencil along with it, which is pretty cool. So thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video, and let's get on with testing some flux. So I figured because we have the nice white solder mask, it'll make it easy to see the flux and how it looks when we heat it up, and we'll also be able to see how easy it is to clean, especially on a white PCB like this. So let's get this flux opened up. It comes with sort of, I would say, a medium-sized metal tip. I really like these metal tips, by the way. These are much preferred for me over the plastic ones that you cut. So let's see how this sort of looks. And so far, it's pretty easy to push out of the tube. So here it is. It's like a nice thick consistency, but not like crazy thick. And it is actually very easy to push out of the syringe. So really happy with that. I'll give it the point for ease of use. So let me actually put this just over here on the left. We can compare the texture of these to the other ones that we use. All right, the next one is this Amaoe M53 Flux. So this one comes in at around $5.56. And I actually was able to find an MSDS for this pretty quickly. So this one is the first one to get a point for the data sheet. So let's break this open. Comes with 2 different tips here, one small and one extremely small. Really curious why it comes with such small tips. I wonder if it's like a really liquidy flux. I'll probably just put the larger of the 2 on here. And this is the only flux that came without a plunger. Now let's take a look, and this stuff is real liquidy. So this definitely gets a point insofar as ease of use. I think this might potentially lose points for actual soldering, as far as how much it's going to spread around and how much of this you're going to have to use to get a nice good joint. But again, different stuff for different purposes, so sometimes it is nice to have liquidy flux. So let's put it on our other one over here next to the Kingbo. And actually pushing that out the second time seemed a little bit less liquidy than the first time. So I don't know, kind of weird. I guess we'll see when we go to use it to solder, but definitely easy enough to push out of the tube. Next one is going to be the Mechanic M35 Nano Flux Paste. This is the one I've already been using, and it comes with a few different shapes and sizes of tips. I'm going to put the medium sized one on. It comes with the larger one, and it also comes with this smaller sort of one that you can cut, and the plunger is sort of embedded into the syringe itself. And this stuff is $5.70, so it gets the 0.4 price, but I could not locate a data sheet for this one. So this one is very easy to push out of the syringe, so it gets the 0.4 ease of use, and I love how this flux looks. It just looks so beautiful. But again, based on having already used it, I know it does, especially when heated, spread out quite a bit on the board. So you do have to use quite a lot of this stuff, but it is nice flux. So there you go. And let's put this on our other little thing here, right next to the Amaoe Flux. Perfect. Cool. So let's move on. Next one is the Mechanic UV223. And this is coming in at $7.33. So it gets the 0.4 price. But again, I could not find a data sheet, so it does not get the data sheet point. But let's get this thing opened up. Comes with a plunger and looks like two sizes. Both seem to be the same size. Yeah, I think both of these are the same size. So I'll just pick one of these here. So let's see how easy this is to use. Yep, pretty easy. So not difficult to push out of the syringe. And very interesting texture. But yeah, I'll give it the point for ease of use as well. Definitely a really interesting texture. It's like thick, a little bit more like the Kingbo Flux, just like kind of more rosiny, more orange. We can go put this next to our other ones. You can really see here the thinness of the Mechanic Nano Flux Paste compared to the other ones here. But yeah, we'll put this right next to it. The next one is its brother, Mechanic UV559, and that's basically the same price. It's just a little bit more expensive. It's $7.54 instead of $7.33. So it gets the 0.4 price, but it also does not have a data sheet, so no 0.4 for that. But we can get this one open as well and try it out. Again, we've got the same two sizes for the tips, same plunger. So this one seems to be a little bit more like the Kingbo Flux. So let's see how this one looks. Yeah, a lot more like the Kingbo Flux texture. Very easy to push out of the tube, so another point there. Next one up is the Quik NC191 Smooth Flow. I did not mean to buy the 30cc tube of this, so this thing is absolutely giant. You can see just how much flux this comes with. But I still am going to give this the 0.4 price, even though I did buy this one, which is over $16. You can buy a smaller version of NC191 for only $13.99. So I'm still going to give this the point because I just bought the wrong size. Another one that also gets a point for the data sheet. This one was very easy to find. It was like the first result on Google. So nice little plus there. But yeah, let's take out this massive plunger. I can't speak to what the normal 10cc one comes with, but this comes with the same little plastic one that you can either cut off, or some of them are already cut a little bit like this. I'm going to opt to use this metal tube one. So we can pop this on here, and let's take a look at how nicely this comes out. All right, so this is definitely harder to push out, but to be quite honest, I can't tell if that's because it's a massive syringe. I'm gonna say probably, but because I can't tell, I won't give it the point for ease of use here, because I did have to put quite a bit of pressure on this to push flux out. This may be completely unfair, but I have nothing to compare it to, so even without the big tube, this definitely does seem like the thickest flux so far that we've seen. So I'm just gonna throw some on our little tray here. Yeah, definitely the hardest one to push out, but again, might just be the size of the tube. Next one is this MG Chemicals 8341 Flux. And this is the first one, actually does not get the 0.4 price. I know this looks like I have the one selected for the tub, but I promise, for whatever reason, this 0 ounces size on Amazon is the syringe. This is what I bought, and it was $17.01. So this is the one I bought, and I did get a syringe. The jar is the one labeled 50 milliliter jar, and it is $23.90. This one over here is a bit cheaper, but it's a completely different flux. This is 8342, while this one is 8341. Now, even though this didn't get the 0.4 price, this does get the 0.4 data sheet because it does have an MSDS. So let me get this thing opened up. It comes with this extremely long little tip here. Looks like this actually comes with some of the safety data sheet information, so that's kind of interesting. So let's put this comically long needle on here. Now let's see what the texture of this one looks like. All right, I don't know if it's because of the extremely long needle on here, but this is very difficult to push out of the syringe. And look how thick that is. That is extremely thick. Definitely this does not get the point for ease of use. It is very difficult to push out of the syringe. This is like a jelly. If I were to get this, I would probably opt to get this in the tub instead of the syringe. You're already paying upwards of 17 bucks for this stuff. So you might as well save your wrists because this is impossible to get out of the syringe. I'm sure there is going to be a way to make this easier to get out, like if you had a shorter needle. I'm just rating these for ease of use based on what it comes with. So let me just break my wrist again and try to get some of this out. I guess that's what we're doing for that one. And finally, the last flux we're going to be testing here is going to be Stereo V3 TF. This is by far the most expensive of the bunch, coming in at $24.80. This is a little bit cheaper on the actual Sturdy site itself, but I was going to end up paying even more for shipping. This may just be because I'm in Canada, but nonetheless, this is still over our price threshold. This is about 20 plus Canadian dollars. So it doesn't get the point for price, but it does get the point for a data sheet. So we do have the data sheet here, and it actually comes with a little pamphlet here, which shows you some reflow profiles, which is pretty interesting. We also have some solder alloys on the back, and it comes in this interesting little red tube. We've got 3 sizes for the tips. The only other one that has 3 sizes was the Mechanic nanoflux paste. We're gonna go with this medium one, which I've been using for a lot of them. And let's see what the texture of this one looks like. Cool, so definitely easy to push out of the tube. It's definitely got this more like resiny look to it, similar to the UV223 Mechanic stuff. So here's the last one right here. This is the Stereo V3. So here's all of our fluxes. The Mechanic nanoflux paste really combined over here with the Amaoe one. I think that was more at the fault of the Mechanic one. You can see just how liquidy it is. Like I was talking about, it really spreads around the board quite a bit. And oh my goodness, this flux like smells sweet without even having used it already. It smells like a candy or something. I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest. It's definitely not like a bad smell, but it's like it has like a fragrance to it, and I haven't even started soldering with it. I'm definitely not like a big fragrance guy, like soap and stuff. I always buy the non-scented stuff, so I don't know how I feel about like how intense this smells without even like using it. Keep in mind, it's only 1 point per test so far. So these were sort of just the nice to have so far. And now we're just gonna get into what matters the most to me, which is fumes, soldering, and cleaning. All right, so now let's start with the next test. We're gonna go back to the Kingbo, and we're gonna go back through them in the same order. We're gonna check how much fumes they put off. And I'm always gonna be using the same chisel tip at 425 degrees Celsius. So definitely puts off quite a good chunk of fumes, this Kingbo stuff. Whoa, yeah, that's very, very smoky, especially because I'm used to using the nanoflux paste that basically has no fumes. It's pretty jarring actually how much fumes this has. I don't know if you can see that as well as I can, but yeah, you can see it pretty well on camera there. So yeah, this is getting smoky. I'm obviously going to be having a fume extractor on when I'm using any of these fluxes, but I do prefer, you know, fluxes that put off less fumes. That was really smoky, so I'm gonna go with 1 point for Kingbo on the fumes front. So let's get this cleaned off and move on to the next one. All right, so now we've got the Amaoe flux here, and this is definitely less liquidy than it was before. I just want to look at this one more time under the microscope here. You can see this is significantly less liquidy than it was like at first. So maybe it kind of like separated a little bit. Anyways, let's get this back over here and let's see how much smoke this puts off. Okay, really not too bad. So not nearly as much as the Kingbo stuff. Definitely still a little bit of smoke, but I'm gonna give that like a solid 3. There's still like a nice chunk of smoke coming off of that, but really not nearly as much as before. So I'll give that a 3 for smoke. Here's the nanoflux paste, and you can see barely any smoke is coming off of that, just a bit. I feel like you can't ask for much less than that. So I'm gonna give this a 4. Next is the Mechanic UV223, and let's see how well this does. I'm cleaning my iron off, by the way, in between doing this. Whoa, okay, that's quite a lot of smoke. I think that's gonna go right in the Kingbo category. Actually, I'm gonna give that a 0 because that smells really bad. The Kingbo did not smell that awful. Okay, that is like unusable without a fume extractor, so that gets a 0 for me, I think, for smoke. Jeez, that was really not a good smell. Alright, so next is the Mechanic UV559. If the last one was anything to go off of, I do not have high hopes for this, but let's go for it. Yeah, just as much smoke, actually potentially even more. It's a little bit hard to give you guys a good idea of how this looks, but very, very, very smoky. This test is horrible for my health. I'm so used to having a fume extractor now that this is awful. Okay, that's gonna get a solid 1 for me. Doesn't smell quite as bad as the other one, but still pretty bad. Alright, next we got Chip Quik, and let's try with this. Wow, okay, really not too bad. Like definitely smoke coming off. It's making a really interesting sound. It's the first one that makes a sound. This is like a solid 2. I would give it a 3, but it really does not smell good. We're gonna go with 2 on that one. All right, next is the MG Chemicals 8341. If I can even get this stuff out of the tube. All right, let's try with this. That's really not too bad. This is like the Chip Quik, but without the god-awful smell. So I'll have to give that a 3. To be honest, this smell, it does smell a little bit, and it almost smells somewhat pleasant, which is surprising, which could be a good or bad thing, you know? You don't want to be breathing in any of this stuff. All right, and finally we have the Steri V3TF. I'm kind of scared to try this because I feel like the whole room is gonna just smell like candy. Well, let's go for it. Oh my goodness. That is definitely like the most smoke so far. I don't know if you guys can tell. Oh my god, and it smells. I do not like that smell. I really don't like that smell. It is definitely like sweet smelling, but it's like Febreze just went in my esophagus. I mean, fortunately with a fume extractor, it probably wouldn't smell that intense. Let me test, just out of curiosity. I mean, some people might be into this like sweet smell, but definitely not for me. Oh my goodness, look how much smoke that puts off. Okay, and I will say with the fume extractor on, like, definitely not nearly as bad. This one definitely smelled like the worst out of all of them, but this one smelled the most intense. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, this just smelled like burnt flux was in the air and was going down my throat. This smells like someone sprayed a can of Febreze for like 10 minutes in the bathroom. So, you know, I don't know what's better, to be honest. Now I can see an argument for like a flux that smells like something. It's good to know how much of it you're actually breathing in, because right there, that was a major difference using the fume extractor versus not. Now, after having turned the fume extractor off, I can really smell it again. It's probably just this that smells. Oh my gosh, yeah, that cannot be good for you. It's just not for me. Smell wise, if it wasn't for the fact that this had the most smoke or fumes out of any of them, I would maybe give this a 1, but that was a lot of smoke, so I think I'm gonna have to give this a 0 on that front. So the two that did the best here was the Amaoe M53 and the Mechanic M35. Kind of confusing names, they're opposites, but they're both really solid insofar as like minimal smoke. Let me just show you the least smoke versus the most smoke. So that one I rated 4, and this is the one I rated 0. And we'll do the one here I rated 3 in the middle, just to get a good idea. So we'll do least smoke first. You can see really not too much. Then you have the most smoke here. It's quite a lot. Oh my goddess. It smells like, you know what it smells like? It smells like bug spray, but like sweet bug spray. That's the best way I can describe it. And then here's the one that's sort of in the middle. Really, really solid. Actually, after trying this Amaoe again, honestly, that's just as good. So I'm actually going to change my score for the smoke on the Amaoe stuff. This stuff is just as good as this smoke-wise. It's really, really minimal. So I'm pretty happy with these two insofar as the fumes they put off. This stuff is really surprising me so far. I'm not sure how it's going to behave again with soldering, but this thing is pulling ahead for sure. The next test, we're going to do actual soldering. So for the soldering portion of this, I'm going to be putting 1 voltage translator on each of these footprints here with each flux. We have 8 different fluxes, so I'm going to be using 2 boards, and I'll try to spread them out as best I can. So let's start with the Kingbo flux, and I'm just going to turn the fume extractor on because I'm not interested in breathing in all the fumes anymore. I'm going to be using 6337 leaded solder for this, and we're going to be setting my iron at 375 degrees Celsius for the entire duration of this test. So we'll just start by adding some flux to these pads, and then we can tin the pads, and then we'll put the IC on, and I'll actually try to use some hot air with some extra flux to see how, oh, this is nice. As smoky as this is really nice thickness, and it doesn't spread out too much. You can see throughout the duration of using the solder, there's no dry spots, and I didn't have to go over them really too much. So I see why people like this Kingbo flux. It's really pleasant to solder with, at least. So before I give it a rating for soldering, we're going to wait until I put the IC on, but I am going to try to clean this off with a dry Q-tip first on one side. On the other side of the Q-tip, I'll use IPA, and we're gonna see how many Q-tips I need to clean off the same amount of flux from the board. So I'm just gonna try to like get as much of this off with the dry Q-tip here, and then we'll use some IPA and try to remove the rest. All right, and there's still a little bit of flux residue on there even after one Q-tip, so I'll use one more with some alcohol and then a dry one again just to sort of pull off the alcohol and dissolved flux. And you can see all of that is basically off now. I don't see any more flux residue. So it only took 2 Q-tips to clean that up. So honestly, that's like a 4 for me for cleaning. So we're gonna give it a 4 out of 5 for cleaning. I'll give the flux a 5 if I only have to use 1 Q-tip for cleaning, but we have to use 2 to get it all off the board. So we're gonna give it a 4 for that. And now we're gonna use it with hot air and see how much it spreads around when using hot air. So I'm just gonna add a little more flux to these pads and we can pop the chip on. And I'm gonna use 380 Celsius hot air at about 50% airspeed. And while it does sort of spread out, it's really not spreading out too much. There's still quite a bit of flux like on the actual pads, even though obviously the pools of it did sort of go out on the edges. We can also try reapplying a little bit here. We could try some drag soldering as well to see if we get any bridges. And honestly, that's pretty normal for drag soldering. It's normal to get some solder at the end there. See, like I'm using too much solder, so I just have to pull that off, and that's really easy enough to clear up those bridges with the flux. This is very, very pleasant flux to use. I can see why people like this. Oh, and I forgot, we'll give this a test for the continuity. So I'm just gonna put a little bit over here, and then we'll heat it up with the soldering iron, and then we can test continuity after having heated it up and activated the flux. So there we go. It's nice and heated. So in resistance mode, my multimeter reads a maximum of 50 mega ohms. If I get no reading from this, I'll give it a maximum of 2 points. If the resistance is over 40 mega ohms, I'll give it 1 point. And if it's under, I'll give it no points for the resistance. And I'm gonna spread it out and try to get the probes like as close as I can without them touching. So about there, and I'll do the same distance for all of the fluxes. And I've got my meter set to low speed so we can get a more accurate reading. But yeah, not seeing any reading on that. So that's gonna get both points for the resistance. All right, so here is the Kingbo one. I'm actually gonna give this one a 9 out of 10, just based on how nice it was to use and how little it spread around the board. So yeah, this one gets a 9 with a final score of 18 out of 25. To be honest, like outside of the smoke, I think that's the only qualm I have with this one. Again, it doesn't have a data sheet, at least that I could find. If you guys can locate one, please feel free to throw that in the description. So pretty incredible how good this flux is for the price. I think it's only about like $3.50 or something like that. So you could get like, what, 6 tubes of this for the price of the Sturry flux. I'm definitely really impressed with this. So the next one we're gonna test with soldering is the Amaoe M53 flux. We can go ahead and put some flux on these pads here, just like that. And you can see this one does kind of like spread out a little bit. You can see the dry spot in the middle here a little bit when I go to use it. So it does sort of spread out a good amount. With the heat, it sort of like, it moves away from the area that you're soldering, which I'm not a big fan of when fluxes do this. But yeah, you can see if I go over it, it's going to sort of make for less shiny joints than the initial ones. So you'd have to sort of reapply this flux every once in a while, but it's honestly not horrible. So let's try again using the exact same method. I'm just gonna try to get the majority of this off with a dry Q-tip, and then we can try to clean it up using some alcohol. And this stuff cleans up really nicely, I can already tell. And right away, there's basically no flux residue left on the board. So that cleaned up super, super nice, and I only had to use 1 Q-tip. So we're gonna have to give that a 5 for cleaning. This is probably the easiest to clean flux I've ever used. Let's try using this one more time here for putting the chip on with hot air, and then we can give it a score for soldering. So place the chip there. I'm gonna let my hot air heat up here for a sec. All right, again with the hot air, this one sort of spread out quite a bit. There's not a lot of flux on the pads there. And I'm only using 50% airspeed, which is a pretty average airspeed for me. I actually often use like 60%, because if you start using low airspeed with soldering, SMD components like this, you end up applying heat for a lot longer on the board. So I do like using around that airspeed personally, but the flux didn't really stay on the pads as much. You can see a large majority of it is just like blown away just because of how thin this flux is. It's especially when heated. But let's zoom in here and do drag soldering again on this. So I'll try not to use as much solder on the iron. The flux is just like moving away from it when I go to apply heat. There you go, finally that came off, but you can see those bottom joints aren't as shiny as the top ones because the flux did not stay on the pins like it did with the Kingbo flux. So kind of annoying. You do have to reapply it probably to get, you know, get rid of bridges and things like that, or to touch up after. And I have the same problem right now with my mechanic nanoflux paste, which is partially why I'm making this video in the first place. That time I think I used a bit of a better amount of solder on my iron. So if you can manage to do it in one pass like that, it does seem to work pretty well. And it does make for some shiny joints if you do it right. But yeah, let me try to get this cleaned up here. Yeah, and this cleans up super nice. It's really easy to clean. All right, now for the resistance measurement, let me get this nice and heated up and activated. You can see it kind of changes color a little bit when heating. All right, and now for the resistance measurement. And same with this one, I'm getting basically nothing at all on my meter. Even with the probes extremely close here. The soldering on this looks okay. I mean, it's pretty good at the bottom there. At the top, looks like it could be a little bit better. But it did spread around quite a bit on the board when I was trying to use it. Especially when using the hot air, it was a little bit less nice to use. So I think I'm gonna have to give this a 4 out of 10. For soldering. It does make some nice joints when, you know, you use enough of it, but that's just my 2 cents on it. But what I will say is it has very low smoke, very low smoke, and it's very easy to clean. So this still gets an 18 out of 25 in total, just because of those things. It also has a data sheet. So for a cheap flux, this is also really impressive. So when I need something thin to get underneath chips and stuff, this is definitely going to be a really nice option, and really does not smoke too much. Next, we're going to go with the M35 nanoflux paste from Mechanic. And this has such an interesting consistency. It's so like elasticy. It's the best way I can explain it. So we can use the iron to just do this. And it definitely doesn't spread out as much as the Amaoe flux. But you could see, you know, there's some dry spots here and here. But I probably wouldn't need to reapply this at least. So it is a little bit thicker than the Amaoe stuff. Even though over time it spreads out more than the Amaoe, it definitely doesn't spread out quite as much when you're heating it, which is a plus for me. All right, what about cleaning? Again, we're just gonna use a dry one to pick up as much of this as we can. And then we can use some alcohol. All right, and that cleaned up pretty nicely actually. I'm not really seeing any more flux residue here. So I'm gonna give that a 5 for cleaning. We just use 1 Q-tip. And then we can put some more flux. And for the record, I am cleaning my tweezers and everything in between each of these, and this sort of does float around quite a bit. And yeah, it does also like kind of spread out quite a bit like the Amaoe flux, not quite as much, but still more than the Kingbo stuff. So here, let me see if I can zoom out and show you, so you can kind of see what I mean. The hot air definitely pushed the flux out quite a bit. We can apply some more to the side here, then we can try drag soldering. And again, here it just sort of dries out. And that one I was able to do in one go, but still you can see at the bottom there it did sort of dry up or spread out from the heat. But yeah, that's looking not too bad. I did miss a pin at the bottom left here with the drag soldering, I think. As you guys have maybe seen in my videos, when I use this, I do have to use quite a lot of it. That is part of the reason why I'm actually making this video, to try to find a flux that is as good as this in the ways that I like it, but also doesn't like spread out and makes it easier to solder with without having to use so much of this stuff. I've been going through, you know, quite a lot of this versus my other flux I used to use. But it is a solid flux still, and there are times when you don't have to reapply it. And let's test the resistance after heating it up. All right, let's see here. Still no reading as far as resistance goes. So yeah, that's gonna get the full 2 points for resistance. Let's take a look at the soldering. So there it is. Soldering on this one is a little bit better. It was a little bit thicker, so hot air and stuff worked a little bit better, but it still spread out quite a bit, to be honest, and wasn't the greatest for the hot air. And you do have to use quite a bit of this stuff as well. So I'm gonna give this 1 extra point versus the Amaoe stuff. So it'll get a 5 out of 10 for soldering. And that gives this one also actually an 18 out of 25. So this basically just made up the point that it lost for the data sheet with soldering. But still, really great flux for how cheap it is. really low smoke output on this one as well, which I'm really happy with. Just because it's a little bit thicker than the Amaoe stuff and a little bit nicer to use for general purpose soldering, I'll still probably end up using this quite a bit. So pretty decent flux. These feel like very similar fluxes. The consistency, how little they smoke, but I think because of that, they are pretty, thin and spread out, and you have to use quite a bit more than you maybe would want to for getting some good joints. So anyways, that's those two. And we can actually move on to the next board. I'm gonna put 3 on each just to keep them all spread out. And next one up is the UV223 from Mechanic. And let's get some on the pads here. And let's see how this works. Again, this does kind of like spread out as you're using it away from the heat. I would have thought this would be a little bit thicker, but it's not like horrible, to be honest. And let's try cleaning this with the dry side and then with alcohol. And I can't tell, is that, yeah, that's still on the board. So that hasn't actually cleaned that off the board with one Q-tip there. You can see the graininess on the PCB before, and you can see I can like spread it around with my pinky finger there. So we could try another Q-tip here with some alcohol. And I'm spinning these, by the way, while using them, so that I'm actually using like the entire Q-tip. And then we can dry off the board again. All right, and that is off the board now. That was 2 Q-tips for cleaning, so that gets a 4. Not horrible to clean, but definitely a little bit more difficult than the previous ones. And we can put the chip on here. Did not mean to do that. I took a little bit of the flux off of the bottom by dropping it in there, but it's not a huge problem. All right, almost all of the flux is just gone from having applied hot air. Very little of the flux actually stayed there. You can see a lot of it just blew over here. But actually, looking at it, there is still definitely like flux on there, so I don't know. The Kingbo has done the best so far, insofar as like the hot air. Let's do some drag soldering, and there is still some flux around. It just was sort of colorless. Did have to go over that a few times, as you could see, probably because it spreads around when I apply the heat. So we'll try the other side now with drag soldering, and I just used way too much solder there. So let me just try to clear these bridges. I'm cleaning the iron off as I go here. Just trying to get rid of the bridges here, but it is difficult to clear the bridges because there's no flux anymore there, or very little at least. But there you go. So yeah, not too bad. And now for the resistance test. Let's get this spread out. And yeah, with this one as well, we're getting basically no reading, even with the probes really close. So that is looking good, and it gets full points for resistance. It was okay with soldering. Upon closer inspection, it's not quite as shiny as some of the other ones, and it spread out, a little bit while using it. So it's sort of an average one. I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10 for soldering, and that gives a final score of 13 out of 25 for this. Probably would not buy this again. Not really anything special. It puts off a lot of smoke. Doesn't really do anything incredibly well, in my opinion. Let's see if the UV559 is any better. So moving down the line here. By the way, I did try the UV light with the one before. I should have showed you, but you couldn't really see it on the camera. And we can get the chip put on. Gonna get that sort of pressed down. And just so you know, I'm cooling these down in between tests because I am using hot air for the ones above. And I don't want the board to be like preheated for the other ones we're testing. Let's see how this does here. So a little bit better than the other one, honestly. Still a couple dry spots, but it definitely stayed in place a little bit better with that one. And after using the dry Q-tip, let's see if we can see any flux with the UV light. Yeah, you definitely can't see that on the camera, but on the bottom right and top right here, you can see it glowing in person. So kind of a cool feature there for cleaning. All right, and after one Q-tip, there is still some flux residue over here on the board after one Q-tip. So I will use another one. And now all of the flux residue is gone. So 2 Q-tips again for cleaning on that one. So 4. And then we can try again with the hot air now. All right, you can see the flux is again sort of traveling across the board here, but some of it is definitely staying in place more than with the other one. We can apply some again to drag solder. Alright, and I'm having the same issue here as with some of the other fluxes where it just sort of like dries out. I'm gonna have to reapply flux to fix that. There we go. So yeah, did have to reapply it on that one. that I'm having to reapply at the end. There we go. So overall, makes good joints, but it is kind of hard to use. It's the only one I've had to reapply. And let's try here with resistance. No reading on this one either. So that is getting full points for resistance. The joints look pretty dull actually, especially on the bottom here where the flux probably just like flew away because it was pretty liquidy, especially when heated. So this one's gonna get a 4 for soldering. It's not horrible, but it's not good either. So this one gets a 13 out of 25. I have very similar feelings as I do to this one. Doesn't do anything particularly well. Probably wouldn't get it again. Next we have the Quik NC191. I am excited to try this one. I am actually going to change my mind on the ease of use for this, even with the big syringe. I think any difficulty I had with this one was just because it's a large tube and this probably just got stuck at first. So it did take a lot to push at first, but now it's coming out nice and easy. So I'll change this to a 1 for ease of use. So let's see how this works. I didn't mean to scrape the PCB like that. This works really nicely. It's not drying out too much. Ignore the scraped PCB there. I put too much pressure on the iron. I'm happy with how that feels. A lot of the flux stays in one place. And even with the dry Q-tip, this feels like it's gonna clean up pretty nicely. Got some alcohol now. Nice and shiny pillows there. Cool, so let's see how that did. I'm gonna take another dry Q-tip here because I think I see a little residue on the right hand side here. Yeah, that's definitely still on the board there. So we're gonna have to go over this again. I'm gonna go over it one more time with the alcohol Q-tip and then dry it up with the dry one. All right, now that is fully clean. So that's gonna get a 4 for cleaning because we had to use 2 Q-tips. Let's see how this stuff behaves with the hot air. I really liked how it behaved with the soldering iron. So I'll pop this down in here. All right, this is the first one where the chip didn't blow around on top of the flux. And the flux is staying around the chip. You can see there is flux around the chip. It did spread some of it out, but a lot of it did stay around the chip as well. All right, we're gonna try with drag soldering. The flux is kind of melting because the board is warm. I've been doing all of these with the board warm. The drag soldering, I used way too much solder there. And we got a little bit of bridging down here. Same on this side. There we go. Pretty nice to use, honestly. Just clean this up. Honestly, pretty nice to use and is making some really clean joints. Look how nice and shiny those joints are. It's very similar to the Kingbo stuff. So there's that one, and then here's the Kingbo one. I would say even shinier than the Kingbo. Yeah, that's really nice. And let's check with resistance. And yeah, no resistance measurement there either. So that does get full points as well for resistance. I am really impressed with this one. It was super nice to use, and these are some nice and shiny joints. I did not have to go over these too much or reapply the flux. It worked pretty well with the hot air as well. So I am going to give this one a 9 out of 10 actually for soldering. I really enjoyed using this one. So that actually brings this one up to a 20 out of 25. I really wasn't expecting this one to impress me so much. Again, I would say it's just kind of a nicer or more expensive version of the Kingbo Flux. It's just a little bit nicer because it has a little bit less fumes put off, and it does have a data sheet. So if you can afford this one, I would definitely get this over the Kingbo stuff. But still, again, if you just want like a ton of cheap flux, this is a W for sure. All right, second to last flux here, we have the MG Chemicals 8341. Again, this is just almost impossible to get out of the syringe. Definitely recommend grabbing this in a tub if you want this one. I'm gonna break my fingers. All right, let's see how this one behaves. Ooh, that is actually really nice. Soldering wise, that is actually really nice. Look how clean the solder on those pads look. And it stays. See how it's not like spreading out too much, so even though it is thick, it is nice to use for soldering. All right, let's see about cleaning. And this was one of the ones that actually did glow a little bit under the UV light. You can't see it, but I can see a little glow on the top and on the left here. It does glow a little bit. So we're gonna try with the alcohol. All right, and honestly, I'm seeing basically no flux residue. I mean, maybe over on the right a little bit. Oh yeah, that is definitely a little bit. So we're gonna have to use another Q-tip here and try to clean that up. All right, and that is nice and clean. And now let's try with the hot air. Very tacky and like thick. And I actually, as annoying as it is to get out of the syringe, I actually really like how much it holds this chip in place. I feel like when I heat this up, it's just gonna stay where it is, which is really nice. It's very tacky. Yeah, look, chip's not going anywhere. I'm just gonna tap the chip into place a little more. There we go. So honestly, pretty solid with the hot air. And drag soldering. Ooh, that's really nice, honestly. Wow, I like this flux a lot, actually. Soldering wise, really nice to use. And look how shiny those joints are. That looks really clean. Look how beautiful that is. Really impressed, really impressed with the Flux. I have to say, as much as this sucks to push out of the tube, it is worth it. It really works super well. This may end up being my new go-to. Like, just based off of how tacky it was when using it with the hot air, that was really nice. But on top of that, it works super well with the iron too for like drag soldering. And I love like shiny solder joints. I think so far this is definitely my favorite one as far as soldering goes. It is stupid hard to push out of the tube, and it does require a little bit more cleaning than some of the other ones. I would say just for the performance of it, it's kind of worth it. And let's check resistance. All right, no resistance reading with this one either. So this one is getting full points for resistance. Yep, for sure. And here's the soldering for this. This is an easy 10 out of 10 for soldering for me. This really impressed me. It was like butter using this stuff. And because of how tacky it was really great to use with the hot air as well. So I'm definitely gonna have to give this a 10 for the general purpose soldering. Honestly, on the soldering front, for me, it leaves nothing to be desired. And I'm happy to give it the max score for that. So in total, that gives this one a 19 out of 25, which is a really solid score. What I might try with this one, and I'll actually try this right now just to see how this works, is I want to try using the larger tube that comes with the nanofix paste, because I remember it being pretty huge. And yeah, you can see just how nice and large that nozzle is. It's actually even, I think, a tiny bit larger than the one it comes with, but the one it comes with is really long. So I do want to try it with this shorter one and see if it makes it any easier to use. And yeah, it does make it a little bit easier. Honestly, this makes it usable for me. I'm really happy with this Flux, especially with that larger and shorter nozzle. This is a huge W for me. So as long as you can get a bigger nozzle, or maybe even one of these where you can cut it bigger, or honestly, you could just use it without the nozzle at all. This definitely increases the score for me. But to be fair to the other ones, I can't give it a better score because it doesn't come with a nozzle like this. It comes with this really long one for some reason. Not sure why. So I got to be fair to the other Fluxes and leave it at a 19 out of 20. But you probably will see me using this more often. Again, all of this stuff is my opinion, and you're obviously entitled to your own opinion on these Fluxes at the end of the day. Even though I attribute so much points to like smoke, for example, or how many fumes the Flux puts off, if you guys don't care about that, just pull that out of the scoring system. And the last Flux on the list here is the Sturry V3 TF. So let's try this out. All right, let's see. Yeah, this is nice. This is very nice. Definitely mostly stays in place. I forgot how much this stuff smells. All right, let's try cleaning it. Dry Q-tip first. And this is one of the ones with the UV light. So let's try shining the UV light on it. Oh, and this one you can see is much more fluorescent. And in person, it's even more intense than that. So this one is definitely the most interesting insofar as like the UV feature. It might make the cleaning test a little bit unfair for it though, because we'll be able to see like any remnants of it. So just for the purposes of fairness, I'm not going to use the UV light for scoring, but we can take a look at it after to see if we got all of it off. But you can see there is still like some residue after one Q-tip, and we'll be able to see it even more with the UV light. You can see that still some sort of around it. So important to note that I didn't need the UV light to see that. All right, and after 2 Q-tips there, this is looking really nice and clean. Let's check with the UV light again. Yeah, basically no remnants of it. So I'm gonna say, even though I used 2 Q-tips to clean it, this is the only one I'm gonna make an exception for, because the UV feature is really cool, honestly, and it makes it easier to see how much you have cleaned. It can be a little bit difficult when you're cleaning Flux to tell how much it's spread around the board. And the feature with the UV light is cool enough that I'm going to add a point back for cleaning. So I'm going to give this one a 5 for cleaning. You know, again, this is just my opinion, so feel free to leave it as a 4 for yourself if you don't care about the UV feature. I will say too, the like candy smell from this Flux is a lot less intense with the fume extractor on, obviously. And I really don't mind it as much, but it's definitely still like a smell that lingers. Just not as much of a punch you in the face smell as it was before without the fume extractor. So let's see how this goes. That's working really nice with the hot air. You can see how much is still on the chip, and the chip didn't like float around anywhere. So impressive. All right, and let's add a little bit more here for drag soldering. Yeah, that's really nice, I have to say. Let's try the other side here again. Yeah, that's just like super nice to use. I would I would say that's just as good as the MG Chemical stuff. Really shiny joints. Yeah, look how beautiful those joints are. Right up there with how shiny the MG Chemicals one is right above it. If you guys want to know why I use gloves, this is a really great example of why I use gloves. Even just from that one little job, this is how much flux is on my hands. And this stuff gets soaked into your skin. Your skin soaks up liquids like this. Not only that, but I'm always using leaded solder, so really recommend using gloves for this kind of work. Alright, and let's check resistance of this one. Interesting. So this is the only flux that gives a resistance reading. Alright, this is about how close I had my probes before, and it is giving us, after letting the reading settle, a little bit over 40. So I'll give it 1 point for resistance, but I can't give it both points. Yeah, measuring again with like the same distance that I did with the other ones, getting about 45 mega ohms. So it's still over 40 megs, but it does give me a reading. It's the only one that's giving me a reading on my meter. This is the kind of thing that could actually cause issues with like crystal oscillators, for example. It can cause dampening of crystal oscillators. I've seen Toltec Merc, for example. He had a video where he had flux underneath the south bridge. He hadn't cleaned it out like he normally does. And the console actually wouldn't boot because there was still flux and the crystal oscillator was not working. Oscillators are very, very low impedance. And even something like flux with 40 mega ohms resistance can still screw with the oscillations. So I'm going to have to deduct 1 point for the resistance on this one. And this is supposed to be no clean. I do want to make it very clear that 40 mega ohms is very unlikely to cause issues with like 99% of things, but there are low impedance lines and things like oscillators that probably will have issues with flux like this. And here is the soldering for the Sturi. Again, just an easy 10 out of 10 for me with the soldering on this. It's very similar to the MG Chemicals one and like how buttery it was to use with the solder. So very, very impressive insofar as soldering. Nice and shiny joints, just like the one right next to it. So that gives this one an 18 out of 20. And for me, that sounds about right. It is incredibly nice for soldering, but it just puts off too much smoke for my taste. The resistance measurement kind of makes me a little uneasy. And the price is kind of intense, honestly, for me to warrant buying this often for how much flux I go through. So all in all, this chip Quik here is actually the winner insofar as the point scale. So if you get more at once like this, for each 10 cc's in here, it's only about like $6. It also wasn't horrible as far as smoke goes. I have to say I am pretty hard on the other fluxes when it comes to smoke, but this did pretty well. And with the Fumes extractor, I'd definitely be really comfortable using this every day. And it really impressed me as far as soldering goes. I think it got a 9 out of 10. And this is definitely something I'm going to be happy using the entire tube of. I do have to mention this one as a runner-up if price is not an issue. Again, it was like $17 just for this one tube, but price aside and with the bigger nozzle on it, this is an incredible flux to use. I definitely prefer this over the Sturi. They perform very similarly as far as soldering goes. This one's just less intense with the smoke and it also is less expensive. So I did have to mention this one because with the bigger nozzle on it, I would say it's just as nice as this other one. And one of these two is probably going to end up being my new go-to flux. So I had a lot of fun making this video. We're definitely going to make more videos like this in the future with different kinds of flux. I already have a few on the list that I need to grab. But if you have any recommendations, please throw them in the description and I'll make sure to grab some for future flux comparison videos. We'll probably pull the chip Quik and maybe the MG Chemicals one into the next round, but we'll see. That just depends on how many other fluxes I need to test. But as always, I appreciate you guys for watching and I will see you in the next video. Peace.